Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about ending your story, and this really is the hardest part of writing, is where to end your story and how. So, what is a good ending? A good ending, like all writing, is simultaneously unexpected and inevitable, surprising yet convincing, which you know by now is my mantra, and it resonates. So a good ending has that aspect of inevitability, but it's also surprising, so that we can't expect that this is how it's going to turn out, but when it does, we say yes, that makes absolute sense, and it resonates because it is hitting on the theme of whatever theme you're trying to sort of bring out in the story. This cements that, so it will resonate. Okay, so in order to, and this again, for all good writing, even if you're writing an essay, a memoir piece, a travel journal log, all good writing has a sort of a circularity to it. So whatever the ending is should to some degree reflect what the beginning is. And so go back to the beginning, take a look at how your story starts. You did start there for a reason. Maybe it's not starting in the right place, or maybe it's not ending in the right place. And we'll touch on that in a second. Think about evolving symbolism of an object. So for instance, in Bosch's story, Tandolfo the Great, the wedding cake for Tandolfo at the beginning of the story, he describes it as a big pink wedding cake with its 6 tiers and scalloped edges and its miniature bride and groom on top. And then at the final paragraph, it has come to symbolize something so great for him, right? He's sitting in his car and he is gazing at the incongruous shape of the cake there in the falling dark, awaiting its destruction. So obviously the cake has taken a real turn for Tandolfo from the beginning of the story to the end. Its symbology has completely changed. Okay, looking to the future. And again, all of this is in your Cardos reading for this week. So you're going to be reading about this. But reiterating it, I think, is helpful here. So the end of a story should begin to reveal what sort of challenges lie ahead for your protagonist. So in other words, we've talked about this before, when you have that plot arc, it is because your protagonist at the end of the story has changed in some deep and profound inner way. So internally has changed, which means the future is going to be different than what the past has been for this protagonist because of this deep internal change. So you might look to the future and think, what will my protagonist be 10 years from now? What will be, how will he or she or they see the world 10 years in 10 years? In what ways has the protagonist undergone a profound change so that he, she, they will never be the same again? Right? So that's the big question you're asking when you're looking at your own story and when you're reading stories. And this is why I do assign a lot of reading of stories, because it really is the best way to sort of capture for yourself what goes on when a writer, a masterful writer, is creating that plot arc. How is it being done? Okay, you may have already written your ending, right? So you don't want to overwrite. And I do think that this is something that particularly novice writers tend to do, is to try to over-explain, to think the reader might not have gotten it, not have gotten that resonating piece, right? And so that it has to be spelled out. And no, you don't want to do that, right? Pull back. I think it's mentioned in Cardos how John Updike and A&P had an ending for Sammy that went beyond his being fired, where he goes to look for the girls on the beach and all that. Didn't need it, right? Cut that out. That's not what's important. It's important how he has this major realization about himself. The girls are really secondary to the protagonist, Sammy, and his kind of realization, this profound, deep realization about the world and his place in it. So again, be careful about overwriting. Effective endings generally I'm saying, because there is no rule here, and you will certainly find great stories that do not hew to this, but they generally will end with an action of some sort. beware of trying to create a moral or a lesson. I'm going to touch on that too a little bit more. And just as beginnings can often be found 3 paragraphs into your work, endings also can be found maybe 3 paragraphs before what you think is the ending. So just be aware of that as well as you're rereading your drafts. Okay, so here's trick endings. And I say breaking the contract because when you write a story, you have a contract with your reader, right? Your contract is to be the guide for that reader. So you are bringing that reader into, and it could be a whole world that you've invented, or it could be a world that we're fairly familiar with, but you are that reader's guide. What you can't do is set something up to have a reader believe one thing and then just trick the reader, pulling out all the rug under the readers, from the readers, where would this analogy go? I don't know, pulling out the rug from under the reader, right? So here are a few that I've taken from Cardos. He realized he was alone and slowly blinked his third eye. Oh, he's the main character is really an alien. And all this time you've read this story not knowing that. I can't help it if that's all I understand. After all, I'm just a dachshund. Surprised the main character is really a dog and you didn't know that this whole time, right? The guillotine blade fell swiftly, severing my head from my body. Surprise, a dead narrator has been telling this story. Now that's a common one, and I've seen that a lot. There are excellent examples of dead narrators telling stories. The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold is the one comes to mind, but many others. But we know in the story that she's dead from the very beginning. There are other stories where we get to know it little by little, but it's not at just the very end that's popped onto us. I'll take over from here. His other personality said, oh, there we go, the surprise. The narrator has multiple personalities, okay? Again, the reader feeling tricked, you're not gonna have that resonance, right? Plus, this is not an inner change for the character. These are all external changes. These are all just external reasons for something to happen. Deus ex machina, which means God from the machine. That refers to any ending in which we sense that the meddling godlike hand of the author resolving characters' predicaments for them. So if you as author come in and say, oh, my character, I don't know what to do with this story, my character is in such deep trouble with his mother. Let's have the mother die. Okay, that takes care of that, right? Or some big coincidence happens, right? Those are going to feel like tricks. Those are, again, those kinds of endings are breaking contract. Okay, definitely avoid that lesson or issue in your fiction. Okay, you're not there to teach the reader a lesson, or even to teach your character a lesson, or to argue an issue, right? That kind of fiction will not resonate on an artistic level. There are people who write that, right? But that's not the kind of artistic sort of literary fiction that we're trying to work on here. And again, when I say literary fiction, if you want to write science fiction, that's great. It has to have literary elements because that will be what helps it to resonate with a reader. Anton Chekhov takes things a step further, arguing that a story's problems need not be solved at all. The task of the writer, he asserts, is not to solve the problem, but to state the problem correctly. And I think that's a wonderful way to summarize what it is when a character sort of has some kind of a realization about what the problem is, right? What is it that his or her, their character has brought to the world that might collide with it, that has been unclear until now? So it's just a shard of understanding or of seeing, or even the character might not realize that themselves, right? Maybe it's just the reader that realizes it. So just being aware of that, you're not solving a problem, you're not teaching a lesson, and you're certainly not arguing an issue. All right, language. Now, language is incredibly important throughout, and that's part of why, I really want you, and I keep urging you to study your grammar, because grammar it's so much about how language works, right? If you don't understand how a sentence works grammatically, it's going to be very difficult to embed that sentence with effective language. And the ending is probably where that language is most important. So if you go back to all the endings that we've read in any of the model stories, you will see how the language is really intense and aesthetically pleasing, and the rhythm, the patterns, the ways in which the words have been woven together will resonate. So this is really, really, where you want to bring all your language skills to bear is in this ending. And of course, again, language is important throughout, but the ending is where you will really want to have that, zing. Okay, so a few questions. What is the story about? What are its central questions? What do the characters want and what do they fear? These are the questions that are going to help you to figure out where your story should end, because this is what the theme is, right? Your story is ending. Where it ends is going to reflect what you think is the theme of your story. So, one thing I like to do is actually write my story before I've actually finished the story, write my ending before I've actually finished the story, because if I do that, it will guide me to where I want to be. So if I already understand what the theme is, I'll write that ending and then I'll write the story to get there. And maybe I'll figure out that's not where I want it to be, right? Maybe that's not my ending, but it will give shape to my story. It will give me a guidepost. Is the problem the ending? And that's a question for you, because maybe that's not where your problem is, right? Maybe you actually have the right ending. Maybe you have gotten off track somewhere else. So, if you've written that ending and you think, wow, this is gorgeous and it's resonating with me, and I love the theme that it's kind of bringing up, and I see where the character's changing, and yet part of the story doesn't seem to lead there, well, that's where the editing maybe has to happen. So it might not be the ending at all. Okay, as always, happy writing. Be sure to let me know should you have any questions, and I look forward to your next stories.